You woke up this morning, checked your phone, and probably complained about something. Maybe traffic, maybe the weather, maybe the fact that your coffee wasn't hot enough. But here's a question that should stop you cold. What if you had been born 10,000 years ago on the same planet with the same brain, the same body, the same hunger for meaning, but into a world that looked absolutely nothing like this one? Not a romanticized version, not a movie, the real thing. You would not have a bed. You would not have a name anyone had written down. You would not know what a city was, what a law was, what money was. You would wake up every single morning with one goal, and it would not be success. It would not be happiness. It would be survival for one more day. And here's the strangest part. You would probably be better at it than you think. 10,000 years ago, the last ice age had only just ended. The glaciers were retreating. Forests were pushing north. The world was warming, reshaping itself. And your ancestors, your actual ancestors, the people whose DNA flows through you right now, were watching it happen and adapting in real time. Anthropologist David Graeber, who spent decades studying early human societies, argued that our assumptions about prehistoric life being brutal and miserable are almost entirely wrong. He found that early humans likely worked far fewer hours than modern people do. Some estimates built on studies of surviving hunter-gatherer communities suggest as few as 3 to 5 hours of what we would call work per day. The rest of the time was rest, socializing, story, fire. If you had been born 10,000 years ago, you would have been part of a band, not a tribe yet, something smaller. 30 to 50 people, most of them related to you by blood or by years of shared survival. You would have known every single one of them by name, by smell, by the particular sound of their footsteps on dry ground. Modern neuroscience suggests your brain was built for exactly this. Robin Dunbar, a British anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist at Oxford University, proposed what became known as Dunbar's number, the idea that the human brain can maintain stable social relationships with roughly 150 people, not because of culture, because of cortex size. Your brain was literally shaped by evolution to track a community of that scale. 10,000 years ago, you would have been living well inside that number. You would have known everyone who mattered. There would be no strangers. But do not confuse small with safe. You would have known hunger in a way that is almost impossible to imagine now. Not the mild discomfort of skipping lunch, real hunger, the kind that made your vision blur and your legs weak. Depending on the season, depending on the migration of animals, depending on whether the rains had come or not, there would be days, sometimes stretches of days, where you ate almost nothing. Your body knew this. Your body was built for it. The fat storage systems, the metabolic slowdown, the intense craving for sugar and salt and fat, all of that is not a flaw in the modern human body. It is an ancient solution to a problem that no longer exists for most people. When you feel that pull towards sweet or salty food, when you eat past the point of fullness because it tastes good, that is 10,000-year-old survival logic still running in your blood. Your ancient self was not being weak. Your ancient self was being smart. Store energy now. You do not know when the next meal's coming. If you had been born 10,000 years ago, you would have spent a significant portion of your life outdoors, not hiking for recreation, just living. Your feet would have been tougher than anything you can imagine. Your eyesight, sharpened by constant use, would have been extraordinary, tracking movement across distance. You would have been able to read the sky, read the ground, read the behavior of animals in the way that a modern person reads a screen. Researcher David Lewis Williams, an archaeologist who spent years studying prehistoric cave art, made a remarkable observation. The images painted on cave walls tens of thousands of years ago, animals, handprints, geometric patterns, were not decoration. They were communication. They were memory. They were religion. Your ancient self had a rich inner life. You would have had beliefs. You would have had rituals. You would have feared death, loved your children, grieved your losses, laughed around fires, and told stories that explained the world in ways that made the chaos feel bearable. The specific content would have been unrecognizable to you now, but the need, the hunger for meaning, for story, for some framework that made sense of suffering, That would have been exactly the same. Now think about your childhood. If you had been born 10,000 years ago, by the age of 7 or 8, you would already have been a contributing member of your band. Not in a cruel way, simply in a practical one. You would have known which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. You would have known how to make fire, how to track an animal, how to read weather. Skills that took years to master would have been your entire education, passed down not in classrooms but in motion. Walking beside someone older, watching, imitating, doing. Psychologist Peter Gray, who has written extensively on the evolution of childhood, argues that children in hunter-gatherer societies had extraordinary freedom compared to modern children. They played for most of the day, unsupervised, in mixed age groups, and through that play they learned everything they needed to survive, not through lectures, through life. You would have been afraid of the dark in ways that modern light pollution has made almost theoretical. The dark, 10,000 years ago, was genuinely dangerous. Predators moved at night. Rivals from other bands moved at night. Your nervous system, the same one you have right now, was exquisitely tuned to threat detection after sundown. The unease you feel in an unfamiliar dark room is not irrational. It is inherited. It is ancient. It is real. You would have had no concept of privacy the way you understand it now. There was no room of your own, no space that was exclusively yours. Everything was shared. Food, fire, shelter, children, grief. The isolation that so many people feel in the modern world, the sense of being surrounded by millions of people and still deeply alone, would have been essentially impossible to experience in the life you were actually evolved to live. But let us be honest about what you would have lost. The infant mortality rate 10,000 years ago was devastating. 1 in 3 children did not survive to adulthood. You would have watched people you loved die of infections that now clear up with a single course of antibiotics. You would have had no painkillers, no anesthesia, childbirth, injury, tooth decay, all of it met without anything to blunt the edges. The average life expectancy, often quoted as 35, is misleading. If you survived childhood, you had a reasonable chance of reaching your 50s or even 60s. But childhood was the gauntlet. Losing a child was not a rare tragedy. For your ancient self, it would have been a near universal experience. You would have carried grief in a way that modern life has somewhat buffered, not better grief, just rawer, more exposed, and yet the people who lived 10,000 years ago were not miserable. The evidence from surviving hunter-gatherer communities, from skeletal records, from the art on cave walls, suggests something that's hard to sit with. They were, in many measurable ways, more socially connected, more physically healthy, and more psychologically rooted than the average person living in an industrialized city today. Anthropologist Marshall Solins called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society, not because they had things, but because their wants were few and their means were sufficient. They did not spend their lives chasing something just out of reach. They lived inside a world that, for all its danger, made complete sense to them. You have the same brain they had, the same emotional architecture, the same deep need for belonging, for meaning, for a fire to sit around, and people who know your name. The world has changed almost beyond recognition. You have not. Tonight, when you check your phone before you sleep, when you scroll through the faces of people you half know and feel that strange hollow feeling, you are not broken. You are ancient. You are a 10,000-year-old mind in a world that is only a few hundred years old. And somewhere in that gap between what you were built for and what you are living is the question worth spending your life on.